Yeah, so we're just trying to talk about the whole Oscar drama. You know, the whole slap by Will Smith against Chris Rock.
It has been a crazy couple of days after that event, hasn't it?
Yeah. It kind of brings our attention, basically, verbal abuse. Like, when does it build up to the extent it's a criminal violation? Or does it ever, right? And then when does it justify some kind of physical contact, like by Will Smith, or does it ever?
It's an interesting question because verbal abuse, to my knowledge, never really rises to a level where you get to use violence. Violence is just not accepted. And there has become kind of an attitude, I guess, in society for a very long time that violence on all levels is both legally and morally incorrect.
Yeah.
I mean, at what point does a husband get to punch his wife? You know, she says,
I know, exactly.
Or a wife get to stab a husband for saying things. There should be no place for violence in our community, and the law doesn't allow for it.
Yeah. So that means that even though some of those verbal dispute or verbal abuse is so upsetting, it doesn't mean that you can hit someone for that, right? Unless you somehow feel from that verbal abuse, coupled with some maybe physical act from that party, that you feel that you are threatened. In my understanding, then it can rise to a situation calling for self-defense.
Yeah, that's true. You can have a thing which we call criminal threats. Criminal threats are when I say something to someone that is threatening enough and doable in the moment that causes apprehension. So let's say, person A is standing 100 yards away and yells, "I'm gonna punch you." That's not really a criminal threat because he's 100 yards away and the guy is getting on a bus. But if, let's say, we're both on that bus and I say, "I'm going to hit you in the face right now," well, then that could be perceived as a criminal threat. It's a threat. It's doable. You can act upon it. But that's not the same as what happened with the Oscars.
Yeah, exactly.
That was an insult to their person, not a threat to your safety.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't rise.
No, yeah. And especially that Chris Rock was on stage, it was supposed to be a joke. It's reasonable to take it as a joke. And to be honest, I don't think Oscar would allow something that is extravagant to rise to the crime level, to be broadcasted on TV.
Yeah, it seems, to be an overreaction and frustration. And then a lot of people would look and say, look, you know what? There is a place in society when you insult somebody that perhaps you should be allowed violence. But that is a really dangerous standard because once you go down the road of trying to interpret what sentence allows for violence,
then you open the Pandora's box.
You don't just open it, you break it open and cast it into everybody's...
Dump it everywhere.
Everywhere. Literally, think about this. Think about the daily insults that people have that would, if allowed for violence, there'd be no end to violence. And then they would always say the same thing. Well, he insulted me.
Yeah, exactly.
So I had to hit him.
Yeah, I agree. So for a lot of those people who experience some kind of a verbal dispute, and especially when it comes to be racial, we really need to look for whether the other party is really intending some kind of a physical harm on you. Say, for example, the San Francisco case where an old lady, she was punched by a homeless dude, and obviously the guy is targeting her as Asian. So then that would qualify for her to hit him back with her stick, and he had to sent to hospital.
Yeah, that clearly rises to the level.
And especially, I guess then it's different for different people too. Say for this old lady, she's old. If it is a 6 feet dude, might not feel that equal fear, right?
Those are the kind of things that we have to analyze, when we look at it. Yeah. And when you get into the racial context, it gets very complex because
hate crime now is codified in California. Yeah.
There are hate crimes, and those actually have their own standards too. You have to be careful. You can't just classify every comment that you don't like on a racial level as a hate crime.
Yeah.
Some things in life are just people saying things that are rude to each other, and you have to kind of get past it. There's another part to this that's dangerous, and that is people often think that there's such a thing as called pressing charges, and that you can press charges. That's actually not accurate. Once the police are involved, they decide whether or not to turn it over to the district attorney, who decides to press charges. And the real frustrating thing coming out of this Oscars event is that it's not Mr. Rock who has the responsibility after being hit.
Yes, I agree. They made it look like it.
Yeah.
They made it look like he gave up the right. But it's not his right anyway.
It's not his right. Yeah. Now, it's very gracious of him to say, hey,
like, I'm not gonna.
Look, you know what? You know what? This is on you, kind of thing. But the truth is, the district attorney's office, they have the video. They have 1,000. They have 100 witnesses within 20 feet, and a million witnesses.
17 million.
Yeah. So it seems incumbent upon them to decide.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. It's funny. One more thing that's kind of sad. You know, if Mr. Smith was charged with a crime, it would probably give him the opportunity to really show that he's contrite. By admitting guilt to a crime, he could come forward and say, you know what, I am sorry, and I accept responsibility. They wouldn't give him any more than some community service, which he could promptly do. And society really could move past this by saying, yeah, it's unacceptable to hit somebody. And even Mr. Smith and Mr. Rock, who experienced this, have taken the lead to say, this is wrong. We're not going to do it. I accept responsibility. I've been properly punished and now properly forgiven by both Mr. Rock and society. But we're avoiding that because so far no one has taken any kind of legal action. Seems to rob all of us of the dignity of resolution that we deserve.
I agree. So actually, I have another example. I would like you to kind of advise to see what is the most proper response to it for a normal person. And that's actually a true story. It happened to me. So there was one time I was driving on freeway, normal speed. Normal speed. Somebody obviously thought I was driving slow. So she tried to pass me. She got out of carpool lane, drive up to me, honk at me so I would look at her, and did this. Yeah. And then she drove in front of me and stepped on her brake. In my understanding, first, this is racial, right? Sure. And then second, by her cutting me off and slam on the brake, that I think is a violation of traffic law. That is reckless driving. So does that so qualify as hate crime?
Well, you guys, you've got three things that are going on here, believe it, or maybe four. One is just the nature of the rudeness of people. Second, you have what we call road rage, and actually making comments or actions on the road are different than if you and I are just sitting in a room. So if we took the same example and you know, two people were sitting in the room and someone was eating a bowl of rice, somebody came along and made those faces that you just did as if to say, oh, you're Chinese and eating rice, the crime would not probably exist. But when you're on the road, and cars are driving, it changes the circumstance so that you can't do certain things. It changes because of the dangerousness of the moving vehicle. Second, hate crimes are not just necessarily rude actions. They have to show a motivation to cause the damage or harm because of your hatred. We don't want to go too far in society and deeming everything a hate crime, because then everybody starts to feel like they're the victim of a hate crime. People do have to take some degree of responsibility not to be bothered by every idiot that says something stupid. At the same time, you're right. If she had hit you or bumped or caused an accident, then there is the variable of the hate crime, because she's created a problem where she, you know, terribly, rudely did this action and then caused damage that accompanied the behavior. You know, again, unacceptable, sad that we're still there, and, you know, dangerous because it's on a road. And then lastly, you're right, braking in front of somebody could be problematic. Although, believe it or not, if you ever hit somebody from behind, it's almost always
it's my fault. Yeah.
So, you know, my advice to people when they run into situations on the road is to back off. It never ends well. They're always sad because cars crash.
Exactly.
I think that one other thing that comes out of this is the dialogue that is helpful to us all. You know, I'm a little older than you, and when I was a kid, there was the idea that if people were rude to each other, there was a believe it or not, a responsibility on what we now call the victim to be tough enough, to be big enough, to be wise enough, to be brave enough, smart enough to turn away.
Yeah.
There comes a point in which you don't want to make everybody into this weakling that can't handle their own circumstance. And in a lot of ways, what Mr. Smith did was he robbed, you know, his wife perhaps of the opportunity to turn away. To
defend herself.
Perhaps, you know. Then again, on the flip side, you know, here he is challenged in front of such a large audience and feels the need to be protective. You know, who knows? The point is, there's a dialogue that's not all bad to come from this. But here's the key. I don't think we should try to take sides too heavily.
I agree. And I love conversations like that so we can actually take the whole matter apart. Not really taking side, but rather learning from that so that we know what to do in similar situations in the future.
Yeah, learning. If we learn from this, then we owe kind of a debt of gratitude for the behavior, because we can look and say, hey, I learned from your frustration, your embarrassment, your behavior, your overreaction, and so that I cannot do it myself. But I do think that there is a variable here. Wouldn't it have been better if Mr. Smith had stood up and walked up, and he probably wishes he had, and said, hey, Chris, come on, man, that's my wife. This is sad. Don't hurt her. You know, probably would have been better just to leave it all alone and it would have disappeared forever. But, you know,
I think if he actually voiced some things, it's like, hey, that joke is not cool.
Not cool.
It probably would sit better with a lot of people than slapping Chris.
You know, there's one more thing too. If he had not said anything about it, it probably would have just disappeared into a million other.
It would.
And no one would have even been the wiser.
No.
Because it wasn't even that funny. It wasn't even that related. And while it might have been sensitive to the two of them, I think the rest of us would have just gone, there's a G.I. Jane 2 movie coming out? I didn't even know that. We would have completely moved on.
Yeah.
Then he would have been crowned the best actor, received a much deserved reward, and been celebrated as a hero instead of a fool, which is sad for him.
It is just he felt the obligation to stand up for his wife, and like you just said earlier, and I agree. I felt like in that act, if it is not consented by his wife, say like, hey, Will, go ahead and punish this dude because he insulted me, then he really is making decision on behalf of his wife for her.
Maybe she did tell him. We'll never know. We don't know.
Right? Like, okay, next time when you get an opportunity, okay.
I will conclude with one last thing.
Yeah.
In the law, there is something else that I think we practice and work hard to do that I think society does not do well. And that is, there's a degree of what we call proportionality. And that means that when you do something, there are consequences that need to be proportional to the event. Yeah. Somebody says something wrong racially, criminally, about somebody's weight. And we have a tendency these days to terminate them completely. Yeah. It's not proportional. Mr. Smith's punishment, if the law was never to step in, is really, quite frankly, very overboard. Yeah. It's overboard. He's going to suffer a great deal for what is really fundamentally a stupid mistake on a big stage. And the act has its own degree of punishment. He's been viewed, he's been measured, he's been embarrassed, visibly displayed. And there comes a point when, you have to say that's enough, which is why I'll conclude with this. It'd probably be better if he was charged with a crime so he could admit responsibility, pay his so-called debt to society, and have it terminated. Because I'll tell you, do you know what happens to somebody that slaps somebody in the face like that in most courts? They get about 40 to 80 hours of community service. They pay restitution. Wow. They're on probation and they move on. They're not going to jail for that. It's not what we do. We understand that's what's proportional.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, always glad to see you. If there's anything else, I'm glad. If not.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dyke. This is very helpful. Hopefully we